Hello, I'm Keith Richards and welcome back to the second half of this video in conjunction with the Agile Business Consortium on MoSCoW prioritization. One of the points that I left you with in the first video was that of is everything a must? And one way of getting around all the musts is something I call granularity. Namely, can you break things down into smaller features or smaller requirements or sub-requirements and then MoSCoW at that level? Now, if you've only got a few requirements, we're in the early stages of a project. I used the house earlier, so kitchen, lounge, bedroom, garden. Well, they're so high level and so fundamental, they're probably all musts. Not necessarily though. I do see many projects that in the early stages, you still can see shoulds and coulds even at a high level. I mean, maybe if you're buying a house, a garden isn't a must, but generally speaking, when you've got very high level requirements, you've probably got quite a lot of musts, if not 100% musts. But what you do is you break them down. So if you break them down into lower level requirements, so let's say you have something like a search facility on a screen, for example, that's almost certainly going to be a must, but there's several ways of searching for things. This is where you get your must, shoulds and coulds. One thing that's important about MoSCoW and granularity is to allow this to come out later on during the project. You do not want to predict this very early on. You don't even want to analyse this very early on. You don't know what colour curtains you're going to have in the kitchen when you start to look at buying a house. In fact, it turns out you might not even need curtains, you'd rather have blinds. We don't want to go into too much detail early on, but as we let the detail emerge, this is where your shoulds and coulds will appear, even though it seems like everything is a must to start with. Now at agileKRC we have our own little system which we call boulders, rocks and gravel. In the early stages of a project you may only have half a dozen high level requirements. We call those boulders. As you move into the project you may start to break this down and okay, maybe we had 5, 6, 7 high level requirements. Now we got 20 or 30 requirements or 50 or 60. We call these rocks. We're breaking down the boulders. And as you get into the time boxing and the sprints, we get the detail. Maybe we got 100, 200, 500 requirements, whatever. But we're now in the detail. And this is where with the rocks and the gravel, we have got areas that we can find the shoulds and the coulds. Now there's one point on the slide there about how to solve the problem. Once you're actually down in the detail, there might be many ways you can satisfy a requirement by solving it in different ways. So this is again letting the requirements come out later. An important thing about the requirements is even the non-functional side, performance side. It might be, using an IT example, the response time. You know, you must have a response time of, say, 1.5 seconds, should be a second, could be half a second. But again, we let this come out as we go through the project. In terms of levels of prioritization, I find many people miss a really fundamental concept which is quite easy to pick up and it's very powerful. And it's quite simply the priority for the project might be different for that of a release or an increment. Agile PM and DSDM prefer the term increment, but it's similar in many ways to the term most people use, which is release. So if you look at the example here, at the project level, requirement 55 is a must-have. That means it won't work unless you deliver requirement 55. So it might be, using the house analogy, you know, we must have a garden. Now it might be you've planned to work on the garden in release 1 and you've put it in as a could have. So you're not sure whether you'll get it done in release 1, but that's what the plan is. So can you see there we have two different levels. At the project level, requirement 55 is a must, but for release 1, it's a could. Now, if we're running a bit late on release 1, or we change our mind, maybe we think that the building diggers and bulldozers are going to make a mess and we need to change the plan here. What we might do then is push that could have back to release 2, where it might be the whole point of release 2 is to get the garden ready. But by operating different levels here, different levels of prioritization, it gives us some flexibility. Now it may be you're promising features to your customers and it might be that every quarter you're releasing something and you can sit there and say, this is what we're going to release as must-haves, this is should-haves, and this is could-haves. Now, if you've got your estimation reasonable, those must-haves should more or less be guaranteed. You can never say anything's 100% here, but you can manage expectations with those could-haves. You can say we're planning to do this in this release, but they're could-haves, they're right down the bottom of the list, so we're certainly not going to guarantee it. But you manage expectations this way, and most customers are happy and they can work around that. Now, don't get me wrong, if some of the musts weren't delivered that you promised in release 1, not good. Right, that's it for a very simple, quick tour of MoSCoW. Love to get your feedback on this, so if you'd like to send us email or get in touch with us, tell us what we can improve on, what more you need to know. At the agileKRC website, we've got lots of free resources, information on how to use things like the structured time box in DSDM, Agile PM. We have a YouTube channel with lots of free advice. For example, the business analyst being the unsung hero of Agile. And you can follow us on Twitter if you like. My name's Keith Richards. Thank you very much for watching. Remember, be agile, not fragile.